Hello everybody, so today we are going to wrap up Unit 9 solving quadratics with the last algebraic method, which is the quadratic formula. So we're not going to cover what the discriminant is or anything like that, but I do want us to remember what we're finding when we're doing these. So I want to bring your attention to this part of the table. Okay, remember the solutions of a quadratic refer to its x-intercepts. So if it has 0 x-intercepts, there are no real solutions. If it has 1 x-intercept, if it touches it once, that's 1 real solution. Then if it has 2 x-intercepts, that's 2 real solutions. Okay, so that's your graphical representation. You've got x-intercepts, those translate to solutions. So we're going to skip this problem for now. We're going to get into what is the quadratic formula. So, quadratic formula, you see that to the right. If you can get your quadratic in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, then you can take the a value, the b value, the c value, plug it into the quadratic formula, and it's going to work. Doesn't matter if your quadratic is factorable. Doesn't matter if your b value or your c value are 0. This is going to work for any quadratic. So it's not the fastest way. Like if a quadratic is factorable, I think it's easier to factor it. But if that doesn't work, or if it seems too difficult to factor, you can go and use the quadratic formula. So it's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, you'll notice it has this plus or minus here, because remember, your quadratic could have 2 solutions. So it could be negative b plus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, or it could be negative b minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that plus or minus takes into the account that your quadratic could have 2 solutions. Okay, so I always learned it using Pop Goes the Weasel. So like x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's one way that you could remember it. There are other songs out there on YouTube and in the internet for that as well, if you would like to look at that. Okay, so let's solve this. Let's figure out how can I use the quadratic formula. So we got 3x squared minus 12x equals negative 5x. That's not in standard form yet. It's not set equal to 0. So I'm going to get that set equal to 0. And then I have my a value of 3, my b value of 5, and my c value of negative 12. Okay, now I can go straight into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b. Remember, whenever we substitute a value in for a variable, I want to put it in parentheses. So x equals negative b, so negative 5, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 5 squared, minus 4ac, so 4 times 3 times negative 12. Extend that square root bar. All over 2a, so 2 times 3. Next thing I'm going to do is simplify what I can. So I've got x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root. I'm going to figure out what number is underneath the square root. So I'm going to plug in what's underneath the square root straight into my calculator. Parentheses 5, parentheses squared, minus 4, parentheses 3, parentheses negative 12. And you're going to see that we get 169. Over 2 times 3, which is 6. Maybe you know square root of 169 is a nice number, which is 13. Okay, when what's underneath the radical simplifies to give you a nice number, that means that this quadratic could have been factored. And maybe that was faster, okay? But right now, we've got the quadratic formula. We know it's going to work. So let's finish this out. So we've got x equals negative 5 plus or minus 13 divided by 6. So I'm going to split this now into x equals negative 5 plus 13 divided by 6 and x equals negative 5 minus 13 divided by 6. Okay? Because I want to split the plus or the minus so that I get both solutions. So x equals negative 5 plus 13, that's 8, divided by 6. If I simplify that, you get 4/3, or if we round to the nearest 2 decimal places, it's going to be 1.33. So that's one of my solutions. Now let's finish out the other one. -5 minus 13 is -18. -18 divided by 6 is -3. So those are my 2 solutions to this quadratic, all using the quadratic formula. Okay, let's now work on B. It's already in standard form. It's set equal to 0. Our A value is 1. Our B value is -10. And our C value is 18. So now I can go straight into the quadratic formula. X equals negative B, so -10, plus or minus the square root of B squared, or -10 squared. Make sure it's in parentheses. -10 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 18, all over 2A, or 2 times 1. Okay? So now let's simplify what we can. We've got X equals 10 plus or minus square root. Let's figure out what's going to be underneath the square root. So I'm just going to plug it straight into my calculator, and I'm going to get 28. 28 is not a nice number over 2. So since square root of 28 is not a nice number, I'm just going to split this off into x equals 10 plus square root of 28 divided by 2, and x equals 10 minus square root of 28 divided by 2. And I'm just going to plug it straight into my calculator. So I got 10 plus square root of 28. I figure out what that is. I divide that by 2, and I'm going to get x equals 7.65. And I've got 10 minus square root of 28. Figure out what that is. Then I'm going to divide that by 2. And I'm going to get x equals 2.35. Okay? So those were not nice numbers, which means that this quadratic was not factorable. So I had to use the quadratic formula, or I would have to graph it and use my graphing calculator in order to figure out what these are. Okay? But quadratic formula is the algebraic method that's going to work for everything. Okay, so you'll notice that both of these problems each had 2 solutions. I'm going to go above to this one, and instead of determining the number of real solutions, I'm actually going to determine what the solutions are. So I'm going to use the quad formula here, quadratic formula. Okay, so get into standard form. 4x squared plus 5x plus 3 equals 0. So I've got an A value of 4, a B value of 5, and a C value of 3. Plugging in to the quadratic formula, we got x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. After simplifying that, we get x equals -5 plus or minus the square root. Let's figure out what's going to be underneath the square root. So 5 squared minus 4, parentheses 4, parentheses 3. You're going to get -23 all over 16. So if I tried to solve this, the big issue is going to be right here. Because we are trying to take the square root of a negative number. Try that in your calculator. Square root of -23. You're going to have a non-real answer error pop up, which means we can't take the square root of a negative right now. So since I can't use my calculator, it's giving me an error because there's a negative underneath our square root. That means no solution. Okay, I think some of the quizzes might say none. Just say none. Just make sure you follow the instructions on the quiz or the homework or something. But if you're taking the square root of a negative, you can't do that. And so you're going to have no solution there. All right? So remember, it all comes back to those graphs. It's all about the x-intercepts. Number of x-intercepts is the number of solutions. Okay? So there will be a couple problems for you to try on Schoology Okay, here is a good solving quadratics summary. So, solve by graphing. That's how we started this. We look at the x-intercepts. If they're nice, or if we can just approximate them, that's going to work. Solving quadratics is going to work for all quadratics because we can use our graphing calculator. Solving by square roots. That's when we can get it set up as x squared equals a number, which means that there's no b term in our standard form, because we can just have x squared equals something. We can square root both sides. We have to make sure we remember our plus or minus when we take the square root of both sides. Okay? Solve by factoring, which is a method you're going to use a lot in the future. You use that if you can quickly factor your quadratic. Okay? You have to get your quadratic equal to 0, look for a GCF, and then do the guess and check. The first have to multiply to the first term, the last multiply to the last, and your inners and your outers combine to give you the middle term. Okay? So solve by factoring is going to be a very important skill. And then what we did today with the quadratic formula. This works with everything. This is going to tell you if you have no solution, if you have one solution, or if you have two solutions. As long as it's in standard form set equal to 0, then you can plug it into the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so I know the quadratic formula is very nice because it works for everything, but make sure you practice all 4 of these methods so you can rock the test and know how to use those in future classes. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Hope you're all doing well. Be safe, be good, do good.